Friends, have you ever met someone that you knew was a divine appointment? Maybe you meet somebody and you're like, oh my goodness, what did God just do?
Change represents the loss of security. It represents the loss of that which feels certain or familiar. It's often a grieving process where you have to let go of something that has been meaningful, that has worked for you at some point in time, but you have to grab onto something new that is unfamiliar.
That was literally the question that I asked myself as I parted ways from my guest today in the airport in Cleveland, Ohio. You see, just before I met this individual, I want to say clown because he's a cut up and he's a great guy. But before I met this gentleman, we just had some major things happen in our life, my wife's life, and we had some things happen nationally. I mean, we literally the week before had just seen an assassination of Charlie Kirk on camera and social media. My wife and I had just spent, as you heard in my podcast, we just spent, 3-4 days in the Dominican Republic where I'm literally laying on the beach crying at the heaviness of what I just witnessed, but also where my heart was. And my wife telling me, "You're going to cry the entire trip." I mean, she's poking at me the way that my guest pokes at me. And I've wrestled with God in this moment, and I find myself in Cleveland, Ohio, on one of the few boards that I sit on. And I'd heard this gentleman's name a couple of times, but never had the privilege, I'll say, in all honesty, the privilege of meeting Dr. Fred Johnson. But let me tell you about my guest before we dive too deep into this episode. He wrote a book years ago. He was a co-author on a book with another buddy of mine that my coach gave me. It's been, I bet, 6-7 years ago when I was seeking monumental transformation in my company. And the title of the book is The Reality of Change in Leadership. It was an amazing book that I needed. It was like God ordained at that particular point. I can remember reading the book, and I had his co-author, which was a resident of the city I live in, was actually in office, and we were talking through it, and I was just flabbergasted at how sensible but yet profound the book was and how it helped my life. And I'd heard this guy's name, Fred Johnson, and through circles that I run in, but I never had the privilege of meeting him. I didn't have any clue who he was. I knew there was this company, a little small company called Initiative One. You may not know who it is, but they are not a small company. They have a big impact with a big footprint that God's using mightily. But let me give you a couple of the highlights. Literally, if you Google, who is Fred Johnson, Dr. Fred Johnson, it says, quote, the GM Whisperer. The general manager whisperer. Now, why is that? Because he has the privilege, I'll say, and the calling to serve NFL organizations like the Green Bay Packers, the Seattle Seahawks. I see a bunch of things on here, including the Tennessee Titans, but I don't see the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know. Maybe he can't handle people from Georgia. He's a nationally recognized speaker on leadership and strategy, and their company has helped many Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 firms. More importantly than all the accolades, all the things that you'll read on bios, and this seems to be the case. Whenever you genuinely meet somebody, you can tell if they're a good person. And Fred and I were riding to an event, just casually conversing, and within a matter of seconds, I knew I wanted this man's influence in my life. And so with that being said, joining me today is a gentleman that I will call my friend, Dr. Fred Johnson. How are you, friend?
Good, buddy. Thank you for those very kind, flattering words, buddy.
And I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Whenever we think about Fred Johnson and the impact that you've had in this world that you've lived in a little longer than I have, you've had some monumental moves. I want to start with this book that changed my life called Change, Reality of Change, and working through change, and what you do with Initiative One and these sports teams, and even in young men's life like myself. What is this concept of change, and how does it help business owners?
Well, we talk about the sacred seas of leadership. And the sacred seas of leadership are casting. These are what effective leaders have to make sure that they don't neglect. Casting vision. Where are we going? Why are we doing this? The second one is communication, being an impeccable communicator. Your yeses mean yes, your no's mean no. You don't beat around the bush. You get to the point. We call it, using KDR, kindness, directness, and respect. A third one is conflict leadership, not conflict management, conflict leadership. Conflict management is when you're trying to take responsibility for the outcome and you're dancing around the issue, trying to control the emotional response of the other person. Conflict leadership is I'm going to operate by principle and I'm not responsible for how the person is going to receive it because I don't know their filters. But I do know if I operate within certain principles of being kind, being direct, being respectful, and I say my truth, the odds that it's going to be received well is going to be much higher because I'm not responsible for the outcome. I'm responsible for how I deliver it. The next one is change leadership. Today, we know that the two biggest things that challenge most leaders are conflict leadership and change leadership. How do you get people to buy into change? Change represents the loss of security. It represents the loss of that which feels certain or familiar. It's often a grieving process where you have to let go of something that has been meaningful, that has worked for you at some point in time, but you have to grab onto something new that is unfamiliar. And yet we know that not all change leads to progress, but there is no such thing as progress without change. And we know that human nature is wired to fight change. And the greatest organizations are those ones who can get the change with the most buy-in from their people with the least amount of drama. And so that's what we focus on. How do you create a company that can, because today, Justin, we used to live in what we call a speed or quality world. And I've never heard people talk about this, but once you talk about it, people always go, well, that's so true. One, for years, we operated by this unwritten contract. If you're dealing with an organization, you're either going to get speed or you're going to get really good, but you're not going to get both. If you want speed, if you want to go into McDonald's and you want speed, you want to be served within 2 minutes, you expect that, but you don't expect to be served filet mignon at McDonald's. If you want speed, you got to put up with less. If you want quality, it's going to take someone to cook that longer. It's going to be, you go to a sit-down restaurant, not a fast food restaurant, if you want quality. And so the expectation was if you want something good, you're going to have to wait for it longer. Well, what technology has done, it's blown that formula out of the water. Because one of the things that we know about technology is the more people are exposed to information and ideas, which the web now does, the more you're exposed to that, the more your expectations increase of the other party. That's why if I get sick or if I have a problem with my hand, I don't just go to the GP, the general practitioner. I go to the specialist of the specialist now to know, who spent a lifelong journey finding out about how my index finger works. Well, today, people now expect organizations to deliver high quality and speed at the same time. That is a massive leap. In a world that allowed you to move at a pace that if you really were to be good, people let you last longer, or if you were going to be fast, people put up with mistakes that came along the way. That leap requires a massive amount of change. And it requires a team to change their complete culture on how they do business. Now, you've moved from a culture where the speed of life was slow enough that one person could have all the solutions on a team. And you could tell everybody on the team, this is what I want you to do. And it could take a little bit longer, but it's okay. Today, to move into that massive change, we have to have you're not going to have that leader suddenly become 10 times smarter. So you have to have 10 brains around you, and you have to create a collaboration culture. You have to be secure enough that if someone challenges you on an idea, you're not going to get your buns in a wad. You're not going to get all offended. You want a culture where ideas can be put on the table faster, received, that people are not afraid to challenge what's being talked about in the room. There's not going to be repercussion. That once we agree on something, it doesn't have to be my idea. We're looking for the best idea. All of those represent massive changes from traditional leadership. And so if you're not changing, evolving, we tell people all the time, if your company does not reinvent itself every 2 to 3 years, you are going to be irrelevant in today's marketplace. And so if you don't change, you die. It's that simple.
Whenever you say reinvent yourself, what exactly does that mean from your seat?
Well, I can talk to that on 2 different levels. For many years, when I was a younger man, I was what we called level 1, as Maxwell, who mentored me for 7 years, used to talk about level 1 leadership. Level 1 leadership worked in a world that leadership was defined by authority and position. That's not our world anymore. And I was a classic level 1 leader. It's going to be my way or the highway. And if you don't like it, find another way. And I remember in my early 30s, I had a gentleman in my congregation. I was a pastor of a church in the Midwest in Indiana at that time. He sat down with me. He was a very successful businessman, and our church was growing like wildfire in a town that had been 20,000 people for over 200 years, never more than 100 more or 100 less. So change was not something you talked about in that town. And I drove change by my personality, by my charisma, by brute force, by power. And I had a guy sit down with me, the chairman of my board, and said, look, you are a tremendous, tremendous communicator. But Fred, the way you're leading, you're turning people off. People don't feel that their ideas matter to you. And Fred, if it's not your way or the highway, they find another way. And you wonder why you're upset that you're doing all this work all by yourself. Fred, you set yourself up for that. And if you don't change the way that you lead, you have already hit the apex of your potential. I'll never forget that. I walked out of that conversation like a dog with my tail between my legs. You know how we've all had 2 or 3 conversations in our life that we didn't like at the moment, that were devastating, but we turn back years later and we go, that was one of the most vital conversations. Well, that was one of them. And I had to change from becoming an autocratic leader to a leader who could lead by inspiration, lead by collaboration, lead from the question, going from this is what I want you to do to what do you think? And what do you think about this idea? Can you make this better? Can you show me where I'm wrong and show me how we need to pivot? But that requires a massive change in how you believe about yourself, because when you're insecure, and one of the things that our company has done is massive research in self-belief. If you have a low self-belief, you have to win every argument. If you have low self-belief, you have to show why you're right and someone is always wrong. But when you begin to grow in your ability to own your self-worth as God has created you, of infinite worth, suddenly you don't have to win. Suddenly you can walk away from something that it's not fitting your values. Suddenly it doesn't have to be your way. All you're looking for is the best way that the team has talked about. And if someone disagrees with me, that means that they feel safe enough around me that I'm approachable, that they can disagree with me and I'm not going to shut them down. It sounds real simple, but I had to go through a massive, multi-year, deep, self-reflective process to change inwardly before I could lead outward change. Change always starts from the inside first if you're going to lead change on the outside later.
So many times, Fred, business owners, whether I'm keynoting somewhere, you've seen this as you speak publicly, people line up afterwards, and I've literally had hundreds of business owners line up and follow me on the hallway, and we talk, and I hear them say things like, I want to be here, wherever here is, but I'm here, wherever here is. And they're fighting and they're resisting the internal change that they know they need to go through to move from point A to point B. And they'll ask questions to me, and I'm interested to see how you would answer this question. They'll say, what is my first step? I know God's called me to do this. I see the vision for my company. We were on a board. I see it. We hear it. We talk about it, right? They know they want. I know I want to be here, but I'm currently here. I know that I need to change internally. I don't like it. It's hard. It's going to be painful. But then they'll ultimately ask the question, okay, I'm committed to this journey. What is my first step? How would you answer that question?
Most people want to go from here to here. They want to go from here to here without discomfort. Change without pain is called magic, and it doesn't exist. What they're really saying to you is, show me the magic pill that I need to know. What is the secret information that you have that someone shared with you, Justin, in order to get from here to here? That some gimmick, that some new piece of information is suddenly going to change all of this. For years, I told you that John Maxwell has had a major influence on my life. And as a younger man, I wanted to be another John Maxwell. And what did I have to do to get from here to there? And, God didn't honor that, because what was really behind it is I wanted to build an empire. I wanted attention. I wanted to know how people to think I was special, that, wow, it was all about me. And it took a lot of pain. It took some things where I hit rock bottom in my life, that I had to do a major shift, that empires didn't matter anymore. Acquisition didn't matter anymore. Acquiring, achieving didn't matter anymore. All of that was based on performance-based. If I perform enough, that will validate me. I had to get to the point, and it took me a long time to get to the point, that you don't worry about getting there. You only give full attention to making where you are the very best you can be in that moment. You bloom, we've heard those terms, you bloom where you're planted. You plant yourself where your feet are. I hear that a lot in the NFL. What that means is, I'm going to focus on being the best version of myself that I am capable of in this moment. And as long as I focus on that and all of my energy, that's enough. And what I've learned is, when this becomes enough, these opportunities begin to open up when your character is ready to handle it. But my experience is I achieved this when I had a lot of brokenness in my life from addictive behaviors that I was not dealing with. And I got here real quick, but it was an illusion, because I didn't have the depth of character to handle the responsibility that came with that. And when this is really a fraud based upon outward impact and not on the depth of character, this always implodes. And so what I've learned is, you give everything that you have to being the best you can be, to be there for others in that moment. And that's, you give it 110%. And the future will have a way of determining what God wants it to be. that it took me a long time to come at peace. And here's the irony. All the things that I wanted so bad that never happened, it was when I was able to release that and let that go and focus on being the best version of me instead of performing how others wanted me to. Now all these things are happening in my life that I would have, 30 years ago, I would have given my right eye tooth for. Today, I'm glad that, I'm the GM whisperer. It's funny because I played 2 plays in my entire life in football. God has a sense of humor. I'm on sought after speaker, all those things, but today they really don't matter. What matters to me is the vertical relationship that I have and the horizontal relationship I have with my family. And that's enough. And yet he keeps giving me more when I really don't even want it. And I keep getting surprised with all these things that happen. So it has to start from the inside. And you have to be comfortable with where you are before you can ever have any hope of being somewhere else.
It's intriguing that the day we're recording this particular episode, friends, is the day that I released an 1.5 hour long podcast. That I've never done that before in my life. And it hit the airwaves this morning. And it was literally my declaration of boldness. And I think, Fred, you just summed up my 3rd and 4th point so much more eloquently than I did in the podcast around that particular declaration of boldness. I'm curious, just because you're coming to this conversation from working with the top 0.001 percentile in the athletic space of the NFL, but you're also dealing with, the top 0.001 percentile of the business world on a regular basis. And you have dynamic team members around you bragging about your team members as we were talking. It just humbled that they even will link arms and charge the mission that you're on. I'm curious in the fact that whenever you're speaking to any of those individuals, and now we're talking to small service-based business owners who are in the top 1% of their industry, right? So these are the best of the best of the best. I don't see any differentiation from the audience that we serve.
That's right.
But whenever they're planted, or whenever you said that lineman is where they're at in that present game of the very next play, there's a mindset that has to be adopted before that play, before the quarterback ever snaps the ball. There's got to be a mindset in the executive team before turmoil ever comes, just like there's got to be a mindset in the small business environment to where before they ever face the resistance that God's going to put in their life to mold them to be the person that God wants them to be, to achieve the thing that God has for them. There has to be this mindset there. You use the word belief. I know you're putting together a powerful book. I can't wait to read it on this idea of belief and mindset, but how do you coach the cream of the crop, man? How do you coach them who many would say they already have this mindset? How do you help them just move, incrementally a little bit more forward in their quest?
We call that little pivots. And you have enough little pivots, it leads to transformation. And so let me use the analogy that you just used as a lineman that's going up. They've just broken the huddle. And there's several things that have to be instilled in that lineman if that lineman is of all-pro caliber. One, they come out saying, I am going to do my job. They know their job. They're willing to stay within their lane. They know their gifts. They know what they're capable of, and they stay within their limitations. And they don't try to be something that they're not. They know my job, and I have committed to do my job, and I have a commitment to be held accountable to my job. So they walk out and they get up to the line and they look at, and this guy's 350 and looks across the line and he's 375. And he now goes, and I am about to face adversity. There is no such thing without adversity. Nothing. And so I walk out knowing my job, knowing that I am responsible. Two, that I know that I'm being put on film, and that if I have a misstep, my coach and my teammates are going to have a conversation with me on Monday morning about what I could do to get even better. So there's always a mindset. How can I find that 1% to keep getting better? I never arrive. And then I always know there's always going to be discomfort. I'm always going to be faced something that feels like an immovable object. And I learn how to embrace problems. I learn how to not tolerate problems. Listen, if you are not having problems in your life, there's only one reason: because you're dead. And so I love the mindset that one of the marks of success is I've got all kinds of problems. The problems are never going to go away if I'm living a vibrant life and I'm alive with passion and meaning. The problems are just going to change in its nature. And then let's say that it's one of those plays where the guy is better than me and he beats me and sacks the quarterback. First, I'm going to be held accountable to that quarterback and say, my bad. No excuses. But I'm also going to learn how to put it behind me and move forward and be able to say, next play. Next play. And so you have to become a person who becomes comfortable with failing forward. And so I embrace failure not as a sign of weakness, but as an accelerated opportunity to continue to grow and to get better. All of those are mindsets, and that little picture of a lineman breaking a huddle and going up and blocking his adversary. Same mindsets. You've got to constantly be open to it. If you show me a leader who thinks he or she has arrived, I will show you a leader that's already in trouble, and everyone around that person already knows it except for him.
I'm fascinated with the way you just broke that down, because that lineman is facing the adversary, and their adversary is also the peak of the order. I mean, they are the best of the best, and they have that same mindset. And so here you have two titans clashing. And as I'm thinking about it in light of being a husband, of being a father, being a leader, being a business person, being a speaker, everything that God has for me, and I know you say the same that God has for you, I can't help but wonder, as you were talking, as a leader, as I'm looking at my bride, my children, my team, everybody that God's entrusted to me to steward and to disciple them, how might I see where they're not giving 100%, and how might I motivate them? It's almost like, go back to our football analogy. We were just talking about the players, but there's also a mindset shift that has to be amongst the coaches and the head coach and even the GM, where they're coaching each other and have that same mindset, but have it in such a way they can penetrate the player on the field to motivate the player to give it their all. So how do you coach the coach?
That is such a great question. So before you do this and you point out to someone where they need to grow, you better be doing this first. In fact, you better start that conversation not with, I need to talk about what you did. We start that conversation with saying, I need to take responsibility for contributing to a situation that I need to talk to you about. And I will tell you right now that I take 100% responsibility that I could have operated differently from that situation. When I'm able to do this and have the courage to look at myself and admit my errors, to admit my mistake, it gives the other person the safety that they can do the same thing. So you better not go into an accountability conversation without doing your own self-reflection first. I'll never forget this, Justin. I was working with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I had this, after I had gained their trust, which is quite difficult in an NFL environment, because you're working with some of the most distrusting individuals on the planet because they've been used so many times. I had the captain of the defensive back room come up to me one day while I was eating lunch, and he said, Dr. Fred, I need your advice. And I said, okay. And he said, our coach has lost his room, his locker room, his position room. I said, really? He goes, yeah, our coach has lost his room. And I said, well, talk to me about it. He said, I'll never forget this. This was one of those another conversations that was a transformational moment. I said, why has he lost his room? Why has he lost the respect of you and your teammates? Why is he not connecting? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, my coach don't know my story. I went, really? Talk to me more. He said, he never admits a mistake. He's never wrong. He has 2 Super Bowl rings from his time with the New York Giants. And he thinks this is all he needs. When we give him an idea of how we could run a scheme differently, he tells us to shut up. Our job is to do what we're told. He doesn't want us to think. He's told us he didn't value what we think. He doesn't value where we come from. He doesn't value our experiences. He doesn't even know my background. He doesn't ask me about my family. He doesn't ask me about my wife. All he cares about is how I can contribute. He didn't value me. He doesn't care for me, and I don't care for him, and I don't care about his schemes. I'll never forget that. He had a coach that always did this, but never did this. If you're going to be a master of accountability, you better hold yourself accountable first. Only when you do that will people be able to say, I respect this, that this person can do that with himself. I ought to be able to do it with myself. To do this, you got to have a high level of self-belief. Because if you're at low self-belief, when you point out and you made a mistake, you're going to go to, I made a mistake, therefore I am a mistake. So I can't admit it. But when you have high self-belief, that you know you're of infinite worth, that not because of what you do, but because of who you are and who made you. Now, if I made a mistake, it just means I made a mistake. That's not an assignment of my value or my worth. And so when I'm able to be comfortable with my own skin, I'm not uncomfortable with admitting I made a mistake, because that is not a statement of my value as a person. That little pivot is a major shift that we work with CEOs, quarterbacks. I've had NFL quarterbacks that I've been brought in to help make a mindset shift, because when they make a mistake, when they throw an interception, they can't let it go. And they think a nice little lecture on, come on, let it go, is going to do it. No, you got to do some deep dive work on why this guy feels that he is a mistake after he's thrown an interception. There's a lot of stuff there. If you don't get to the point that you know that you're enough, you will never be able to help your company or those in your company ever feel that they're enough. I hope that I apologize. My passion just comes out.
No need to apologize, buddy. My mind is swirling right now. I want to think about what you just said, because I'm guilty, personally, many times. I think most of us as leaders would say we're guilty. It is falling forward, but I want to unpack vulnerability for a second, because I think vulnerability as a leader is powerful. And I want to share a small story of something, a real life example, friend. So Fred and I were in a board meeting together, and we're cutting full, and I mean, off the camera's off and no one's there. You just having fun, like a locker room, just, rubbing shoulders and making zingers, just a lot of fun. And we're riding to the board the second day, and Fred and I are talking about just life, a little bit more in depth. And he looks at me in the middle of a conversation, and he says, "What can I do for you?" One of this conversation you won't ever forget. Thanks, by the way. And I did what I typically would do, guarded, not vulnerable. And I said, "No, I'm good." Say anything, kind of, we average conversation went on. He was telling me about his boys and the proud daddy moment with his kids in military and some monumental feats. Let me just tell you, a blessed man's on both sides of these cameras today. And he makes a statement in passing, and I literally said at that moment, I said, I'm going to write this down. He said, there's nothing more dangerous than a dead man made alive again. I said, I'm going to write this down. I paused in the conversation, put in the back, I said, Fred, there's a song. There's a song there. And I wrote a song. I said it to him. It's just a song that was on my heart based on the
loved it.
As we're walking into this meeting, he pauses as a leader does. And he doesn't necessarily attack, but it wasn't necessarily easy. It was a moment of vulnerability, friends. Fred looks at me and he said, hey, what you just said back on the van is not truthful. I said, whoa, what did I say? I don't think I was lying. And he said, you said you're fine. Let me tell you a story. And then my guest, Dr. Fred Johnson, who, if you look at his resume on the public's view, opened up authentically. And that moment of vulnerability was, as the scripture says, iron sharpening iron. Now, I am not near as sharp, nor near as strong as iron as Dr. Fred Johnson.
Oh, I would disagree. You're as sharp as they come, man. I admire your gifts, man. Your gifts are off the charts.
Dude, in that moment, you were sharpening. And I want to bring that to our conversation amongst our leaders, our business owners, because what I saw from a very seasoned, grounded individual who has the honor and privilege to serve people all over the world was vulnerability crack through to give some direction and guidance. And I'm wondering, how do you communicate, or how do you, I know you portrayed it to me, but as you're teaching these players, these quarterbacks, these CEOs, even your own team, how do you position them to be vulnerable so that they can win the hearts of those they have the honor and privilege to serve?
Yes. Wow. What a great question. It's a deep question. First of all, we have a big misunderstanding about what vulnerability is. We think vulnerability is soft. We think vulnerability is, our society has taught us that vulnerability is touchy-feely. Vulnerability is foo-foo. Vulnerability is hard. It is courageous. It does what you don't want to do, but you do it because you need to do it. When you're at the level that you are, Justin, there are very few people in your life that you meet on your level that can stimulate you. And when you have that rare person around you, that's a moment of a gift. Or you can treat that person like everybody else. And that day I asked you in the van, can I do something for you? And your complexion changed immediately without even realizing. It was like you got steely-faced, and I felt a distance of 100 miles at that moment for one split second when you said, I'm good. I don't need anything. You can't help me. And I just had what I call an moment. Is something in the back of my head just went, ooh, that was sharp. The reason it took me a long time, at least a couple hours to have that conversation, is because I was saying, what was it that was so sharp? And I had to test it. And I went, wait a second. Are you being honest with him? Because you let that go. And so if you're really his friend and you're sensing this is an opportunity, you need to go back and have that conversation. And that's what caused me right before we got in the elevator and said, you can't lead people who you're doing this with. And you were doing that with me, Justin.
Yeah, I was.
And vulnerability is having the conversation with another person that you know is going to be uncomfortable for that person. And you know the risk is that person may reject what you're saying and maybe even may reject you. for stepping over a line. But because you care deeply, you have the conversation anyway. Because you care deeply. And so you better have that, your motives better be pure. It wasn't about showing Justin Goodbread that Fred Johnson can live in his world, which I can't. I've told you, I've told my wife, anybody I've talked about you, that you're one of the most gifted, creative. Everything you touch turns to gold, and I have to work 3 times as hard at something that you do. But vulnerability, there is no such thing as growth without vulnerability. Either receiving, and vulnerability requires that I also put my defensiveness down. And I'm able to receive that information because I know it comes from a place of sincerity. And what can I do to grow 1% from this? Vulnerability doesn't happen apart from someone who has the courage to be themselves in front of other people, facing the risk of judgment and rejection, but you do it anyway. Now, I will tell you, I've done that and I've been rejected. And to say, oh, okay, no big deal, I'll spend 3 or 4 days over that until I have to get beyond that. But the thing is, I'll do it again the next time with someone else.
A lot of wisdom there, friends. A lot of truth. I'm not often quiet in the sense that somebody can pause me. And I don't say that braggadocious. That's not who I am. I think you guys know me. My brain operates at warp speed. And whenever Fred just made that one sentence, there was an unbelievable, almost like the defenses were down. And they were, because they were up. Candidly, they were up. Because candidly, in complete disclosure, friends, is Fred and I on a board impacting a dynamic business together. Last thing I want to do is offend a board member by me being authentic to who I am. I don't want to do that. I don't want to harm anybody. And what I witnessed in that point was a life-changing conversation, Fred, that I'll never forget. But as you're talking through that, this is probably the most difficult question I've asked thus far. And I don't mean to be difficult, but how does a business owner or a business leader look to a team that may not be at that point where they're ready to be vulnerable, but they know the mission and they're all verbally committed to said mission, but yet they haven't brought themselves together as the team who's ready to win the Super Bowl, or they haven't brought themselves to that cohesive unit that can do what the other person is thinking without them even having to communicate? How does that leader, through authenticity, through vulnerability, through prayer, supplication, through how do they lead a dynamic team to the point of the Super Bowl?
You don't lead the rest of the team. You start by leading yourself first. They may not be ready. The only thing you can do before they're ready is you start modeling that behavior in front of them now before they're ready today. And you keep doing it, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it. And if you're operating from a true place of sincerity, it's going to come out. You may mumble over the words, fumble over the words, but people who have any sense of any kind of morality and compassion are going to pick that up. I will tell you, there is no such thing as accountability without vulnerability. It takes vulnerability to have the hard conversation with you. It takes vulnerability for you to receive it without being defensive. The hardest lessons of leadership that on the outside look tough require the most sensitivity coming from the inside. I had that conversation with you because one of the principles that I live by is I'm a truth teller. Now, I've heard people before, well, you can always count on me to tell you the truth. And I'll go, well, that's part of the problem. The truth has to be, I tell people that I'm a missile deliverer, but you better clothe those missiles in velvet. And you better deliver the art of, let me give you information, not because I want to make you feel small, but because I want to make you feel tall. I'm giving you this information because I care about you. And by the way, and this is what I say to my teammates. This is what I say to those I coach. There will be times that I'm letting you down. And if I may not know it. I need you to tell me. The same thing that I'm asking for you goes back to me. If you can't create that reciprocity, you cannot create a vulnerable relationship where both are out vulnerabilizing, that's a new word, each other.
Yeah. They teach you that in West Virginia, how to make up words like that?
They did. I'm a hillbilly, but I have a doctorate, so you call me Hill William.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Friends, I think you see why Fred and I hit it off, because we had a moment of vulnerability. And I got to tell you, I've received some powerful text messages of encouragement at the moment whenever I needed it. And it's just amazing that if you place yourself in environments to be used for your calling, it's amazing what God will do. It's absolutely amazing.
Well, you know what Fred, the cool thing is, Justin?
Yeah.
While you're talking about that, since you've come into my life, you've given me another lens to look at some things that in leading my own company that I need to grow in significantly. And I'm going to be tapping you. How do you do this? How do you do that? I've been working my tail off for years and have never been able to do that. How do you do that? That's vulnerability. Saying I don't have my act together. It may appear, I always, by the way, get the most nervous around people who appear that they've got it all together. The fact is, none of us have it all together. None of us have a thing to prove to each other because we're all broken. And once I can accept that about the other person and myself, this thing about the charades that we play and the games that we play to try to impress each other go out the window,
Well said. Well said. So, Fred, we're going to obviously put a link to the book and social media, but where's the best place if somebody wants to learn more about you, follow your wisdom, etc.? Where would you send them to?
They can go to a couple places. They can go to drfredjohnson.com. They can also go to Initiative One, that's spelled out O-N-E, initiative1.com, to learn more about us. We do a monthly what we call a think tank, where this is part of one of my values is giving. And so we do a 1 week a month on a Friday from 7:45 to 8:30. They can go on our website and find out the dates of this. I do a full presentation as if I am speaking to 500 people and getting paid $30,000 for it. I do it completely for free. And I share leadership lessons. We started off with 16. We've gone up as high as 1,800 that are on either there in the building with us or online. Check us out. Register for our think tanks. That's a good way to get to know us. Plus, you can go on YouTube and look up Dr. Fred W. Johnson, and you'll see my mug all over the place. So there's a lot of different ways.
Well, friends, I think you've heard a couple business owners chat openly and authentically with each other. And if you reflect back on, I'm going to tell you, go back and listen to this podcast a couple of times, because there were several bites of wisdom. There were several mic drop moments throughout this conversation that Fred gave us. As a business owner, I know that you desire freedom. Whatever that is for you, you desire freedom. You wouldn't be a business owner if you didn't. Ultimately, we know ultimate freedom is found in Jesus, but you desire freedom nonetheless. The only way you're going to achieve that freedom is through resistance. And most of the time, resistance comes from working with our team. Let's just be honest. But pushing businesses forward, it is tough. It is hard work. But we're not afraid of hard work, or else we wouldn't be business owners, would we? So take a listen to what Fred just went through. I've mentioned several of his books before in the past, and we'll put a link to the show notes below. I will tell you the Navigating Change book. What was the title of the book off top? I can't remember off the top of my head, Fred.
The Reality of Change.
Reality of Change. I will tell you that single book, friends, It is a Justin Goodbert endorsed book because whenever I read that with my coach and I applied it to my life and my company, it dynamically changed. Many of you ask, hey, Goodbert, how in the world did you grow a company from 0 to 8 figures in 49 months and exit it, do all those things? This is one of those little nuggets that was in my repertoire. So that's the secret. Education without application leads to stagnation. Friends, we know that. So the question is what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to go out and impact somebody's life? Let me tell you 2 words. 2 words only. If you do this, it'll change some things for you. You ready? Here we go. Be relentless. Be relentless. Y'all go out and make it a great one.